The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love, written by Bell Hooks. Chapter 9, Healing Male Spirit, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz, June 22nd, 2022. Men cannot speak their pain in patriarchal culture. Boys learn this in early childhood. As a girl, I was awed by a man in my church, a deacon who would stand before the congregation and speak his love for the divine spirit. Often in the midst of his testimony, he would begin to weep, sobbing tears into a big white handkerchief. The girls and boys who witnessed his tears were embarrassed for him, for in their eyes he was showing himself to be weak. When he wept, the men who stood beside him turned their eyes away. They were ashamed to see a man express intense feeling. I remembered this beautiful man of feeling in the autobiography of my girlhood, Bone Black. Quote, "To her child mind, old men were the only men of feeling. They did not come at one smelling of alcohol and sweet cologne. They approached one like butterflies, moving light and beautiful, staying still for only a moment. They were the brown-skinned men with serious faces who were the deacons of the church, the right-hand men of God. They were the men who wept when they felt his love, who wept when the preacher spoke of the good and faithful servant. They pulled wrinkled handkerchiefs out of their pockets and poured tears in them, as if they were pouring milk into a cup. She wanted to drink those tears that, like milk, could nourish her and help her grow." End quote. To counter patriarchal representations of men as being without feeling, in both the books I write for adults and those I write for children, I have endeavored to create images of men that demonstrate their beauty and integrity of spirit. Though we rarely use the word patriarchy, everyone knows how sexist masculinity has assaulted the spirits of men. Though wrong-minded in his implied blaming of women for the emotional deadness that males feel, poet Robert Bly called on men to find the wild man within in hopes that they would, in a safe space, let their hearts speak, that they would howl and cry and dance and play and find again the spirit within. Of course, men who participated in workshops such as those Bly conducted let loose for a while and then journeyed back to their patriarchal world, leaving the wild spirit behind. Any reader of Robert Bly's Iron John can hear the mother blame in his words, and Bly is right to demand that we all look at the role mothers play in deadening the spirits of boy children, but he fails to acknowledge that such mothers in their acts of maternal sadism are really doing the work of patriarchal caretaking, doing what they were taught a good mother should do. It is highly ironic that we are now living in a time when we are told to question whether mothers can raise sons, when so many patriarchal men have been taught the beliefs and values of patriarchy by mothers firsthand. Many mothers in patriarchal culture express their rage at adult men by directing anger at their sons. In The Power of Partnership, Riane Eisler explains, quote, "Some women direct their suppressed anger against men they feel are weak or vulnerable, their sons, for example. The psychologist David Winter found that women living in countries or periods of extreme male dominance tend to be very controlling of their sons, who are the only males it is safe for them to vent against. Women in these circumstances are often subtly, or not so subtly, abusive of their sons." End quote. Many mothers in patriarchal culture silence the wild spirit in their sons, the spirit of wonder and playful tenderness, for fear their sons will be weak, will not be prepared to be macho men, real men, men that other men will envy and look up to. Much of the anger men direct at mothers is a response to the maternal failure to protect the spirit of the boy from patriarchal harm. In one of the family therapy sessions Terence Real writes about in How Can I Get Through to You, a son describes that moment when patriarchal culture intrudes on the emotional bond with his mother and her acquiescence. The son recalls, "She was telling me, 'Let me go, darling, just let me go. We know that your father's a brute. We live together in a world of refined feeling he can never understand. But you see, darling, I'm helpless, aren't I? What am I to do?' Everyday mothers are ruthlessly and brutally terminating their emotional connection with male children in order to turn them over to patriarchy, whether to an actual unfeeling father or to a symbolic father. Boys feel the pain, and they have no place to lay it down, so they carry it within. They can take it to the place where it is converted into rage. Learning to dissimulate, men learn to cover up their rage, their sense of powerlessness. Yet when men learn to create a false self as a way to maintain male domination, they have no sound basis on which to build healthy self-esteem. To always wear a mask as a way of asserting masculine presence is to always live the lie, to be perpetually deprived of an authentic sense of identity and well-being. This falseness causes males to experience intense emotional pain. Rituals of domination help mediate the pain. They provide an illusory sense of self and identity. Poet and farmer Wendell Berry, in The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture, suggests that, quote, "If we removed the status and compensation from the destructive exploits we classify as manly, men would be found to be suffering as much as women. They would be found to be suffering for the same reason. They are in exile from the communion of men and women, which is the deepest connection with the communion of all creatures." End quote. Many men in our society have no status, no privilege. They receive no freely given compensation, no perks with capitalist patriarchy. For these men, domination of women and children may be the only opportunity to assert a patriarchal presence. These men suffer. Their anguish and despair has no limits or boundaries. They suffer in a society that does not want men to change, that does not want men to reconstruct masculinity, so that the basis for the social formation of male identity is not rooted in an ethic of domination. Rather than acknowledge the intensity of their suffering, they dissimulate, they pretend, they act as though they have power and privilege when they feel powerless. Inability to acknowledge the depths of male pain makes it difficult for males to challenge and to change patriarchal masculinity. Broken emotional bonds with mothers and fathers, the traumas of emotional neglect and abandonment that so many males have experienced and been unable to name, have damaged and wounded the spirits of men. Many men are unable to speak their suffering. Like women, those who suffer the most cling to the very agents of their suffering, refusing to resist sexism or sexist oppression. Their refusal is rooted in the fear that their weakness will be exposed. They fear acknowledging the depths of their pain. As their pain intensifies, so does their need to do violence, to coercively dominate and abuse others. Barbara Deming explains, quote, "I think the reason that men are so very violent is that they know deep in themselves that they are acting a lie, and so they are furious. You can't be happy living a lie, and so they're furious at being caught in the lie, but they don't know how to break out of it, so they just go further into it." End quote. For many men, the moment of violent connection may be the only intimacy, the only attainable closeness, the only space where the agony is released. When feminist women insist that all men are powerful oppressors who victimize from the location of power, they obscure the reality that many victimize from the location of victimization. The violence they do to others is usually a mirroring of the violence enacted upon and within the self. Many radical feminists have been so enraged by male domination that they cannot acknowledge the possibility of male suffering or forgive. Failure to examine the victimization of men keeps us from understanding maleness, from uncovering the space of connection that might lead more men to seek feminist transformation. Urging women to overcome their fear of male anger, Barbara Deming writes that men are in a rage because they are acting out a lie, which means that in some deep part of themselves they want to be delivered from it, are homesick for the truth. End quote. She explains that their fury gives us reason to fear, but also gives us a reason to hope. It has been terribly difficult for advocates of feminism to create new ways of thinking about maleness, feminist paradigms for the reconstruction of masculinity. Despite the successes of the feminist movement, the socialization of boys, the making of patriarchal masculine identity has not been radically altered. Feminist writing, whether fiction or theory, rarely focuses on male change. I am always disturbed when male students request references to literature that will serve as a guide as they struggle to interrogate patriarchy and create progressive identities, because there is so little literature to offer them. By contrast, I can offer countless references to any female student who tells me she is trying to critically understand and change sexist female roles. There needs to be more feminist work that specifically addresses males. They need feminist blueprints for change. In a course on feminist theory, I ask students to comment on a book, film, television show, or any personal experience that offers them examples of reconstructed feminist masculinities. In a class of more than 40 students, there were few positive responses. Several students talked about the old John Sayles movie, The Brother from Another Planet, and his most recent film, Sunshine State. I called attention to Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple. Often, when this novel is discussed, Seeley's transformation from object to subject receives attention, but no one talks about the fact that the novel also chronicles Mr.'s transformation, his movement away from patriarchal masculinity towards a caring, nurturing self who is able to participate in community. In feminist fiction, radically new roles for men emerge. As a fantasy, The Color Purple provides a utopian vision of the process by which men who embody a destructive sexist masculinity change. In The Color Purple, Walker portrays the techniques of patriarchal domination used by males to maintain power in the domestic household, writing graphic accounts of abuse and terrorism. Yet she also portrays the process by which the dominating male acquires a new consciousness and new habits of being. Her utopian vision of male transformation does not place the sole burden of change on men. Sally must also change her attitudes towards men. She must not only affirm Albert's transformation, she must understand and forgive him. Her acceptance enables him to rejoin the community, to embrace a vision of mutual partnership. At the end of the novel, Sally says of Albert, "After all the evil he done, I know you wonder why I don't hate him. I don't hate him for 2 reasons. 1, he loved Shug. And 2, Shug used to love him. Plus, look like he's trying to make something out of himself. I don't mean just that he work and he clean up after himself and he appreciate some of the things God was playful enough to make. I mean, when you talk to him now, he really listens. And one time, out of nowhere in the conversation us was having, he said, 'Sally, I'm satisfied. This is the first time I ever lived on Earth as a natural man. Feel like a new experience.' To change, Albert must understand why he has abused women. He locates that will to abuse in the trauma of his upbringing when he is coerced to choose against his true self as part of being indoctrinated into patriarchy. Dehumanized himself, it is easy for him to feel justified in dehumanizing others. Near the end of the book, Albert becomes a contemplative thinker who seeks to understand the reason for human existence. He says, quote, "I think us here to wonder myself, to wonder, to ask, and that wondering about the big things and asking about the big things, you learn about the little ones, almost by accident. But you never know nothing more about the big things that you start out with. The more I wonder, you say, the more I love." As a patriarch, Albert was unable to love. Unlike Walker's fictional character Albert, most men are not compelled by circumstances beyond their control to change. Most men who are suffering a crisis of masculinity do not know where to turn to seek change. In the film Antoine Fisher, which is based on a true story, the troubled young black male expresses his crisis by saying, "I don't know what to do." A feminist future for men can enable transformation and healing. As advocates of feminism who seek to end sexism and sexist oppression, we must be willing to hear men speak their pain. Only when we courageously face male pain without turning away will we model for men the emotional awareness that healing requires. To heal, men must learn to feel again. They must learn to break the silence, to speak the pain. Often men, to speak the pain, first turn to the women in their lives and are refused a hearing. In many ways, women have bought into the patriarchal masculine mystique. Asked to witness a male expressing feelings, to listen to those feelings and respond, they may simply turn away. There was a time when I would often ask the men in my life to tell me his feelings. And yet that man, when he began to speak, I would either interrupt or silence him by crying, sending him the message that his feelings were too heavy for anyone to bear, so it was best if he kept them to himself. As the Sylvia cartoon I have previously mentioned reminds us, women are fearful of hearing men voice feelings. I did not want to hear the pain of my male partner because hearing it required that I surrender my investment in the patriarchal ideal of the male as protector of the wounded. If he himself was wounded, then how could he protect me? As I matured, as my feminist consciousness developed to include the recognition of patriarchal abuse of men, I could hear male pain. I could see men as comrades and fellow travelers on the journey of life and not as existing merely to provide instrumental support. Since men have yet to organize a feminist men's movement that would proclaim the rights of men to emotional awareness and expression, we will not know how many men have indeed tried to express feelings, only to have the women in their lives tune out or be turned off. Talking with men, I have been stunned when individual males would confess to sharing intense feelings with a male buddy, only to have that buddy either interrupt to silence the sharing, offer no response, or distance himself. Men of all ages who want to talk about feelings usually learn not to go to other men, and if they are heterosexual, they are far more likely to try sharing with women they have been sexually intimate with. Women talk about the fact that intimate conversation with males often takes place in the brief moments before and after sex. And of course, our mass media provides the image again and again of the man who goes to a sex worker to share his feelings, because there is no intimacy in that relationship, and therefore, no real emotional risk. Being quote-unquote vulnerable is an emotional state that many men seek to avoid. Some men spend a lifetime in a state of avoidance and therefore never experience intimacy. Sadly, we have all colluded with the patriarchy by faking it with men, pretending levels of intimacy and closeness that we do not feel. We tell men we love them when we feel we have absolutely no clue as to who they really are. We tell fathers we love them when we are terrified to share our perceptions of them, our fear that if we disagree we'll be cast out, we will be excommunicated. In this way, we all collude with patriarchal culture to make men feel they can have it all, that they can embrace patriarchal manhood and still hold their loved ones dear. In reality, the more patriarchal a man is, the more disconnected he must be from feeling. And if he cannot feel, he cannot connect. If he cannot connect, he cannot be intimate. Significantly, Terence Real suggests that most men do not know what intimacy is, that the one-up, one-down world of masculinity leaves little space for tenderness. One is either controlled or controlling, dominator or dominated. He shares the powerful insight that when they speak of fearing intimacy, what they really mean is that they fear subjugation. This fear of subjugation is often triggered by the reality that boys parented by patriarchal women are controlled via their longing for maternal closeness. In maternal sadism, the manipulative woman exploits the boy's emotional vulnerability to bind him to her will, to subjugate him. This early experience resides at the heart of many a man's fear of being intimate with a grown woman, and it may explain why so many men in patriarchal culture seek intimacy with girls or women young enough to be their daughters. There is little feminist discussion of maternal sadism in relation to boys, because it has been difficult for feminist thinkers to find a language to name the power mothers wield over children in a patriarchal culture, where in the larger social context, mothers are so powerless. Yet it may be that very powerlessness in relation to grown men in patriarchy that leads so many women to exert emotional power over boys in a damaging manner. For this reason, single-parent homes where mothers are dysfunctional and maternal sadism abounds are as unhealthy a place to raise boys as dysfunctional two-parent homes, where maternal sadism is the norm. In the two-parent home, the boy child may be fortunate to have an adult male who serves to intervene against maternal sadism, who acts as the enlightened witness. Such intervention is absent in the single female-headed household. Women are not inherently more loving than men. Women may give care and still be emotionally abusive. There's been such a strong tendency in patriarchal culture to simply assume that women are loving and capable of being intimate, that female failure to acquire the relational skills that would make intimacy possible often goes unnoticed. Most females are encouraged to learn relational skills, yet damaged self-esteem may prevent us from applying those skills in a healthy manner. If we are to begin to create a culture in which feminist masculinity can thrive, then women who mother will need to educate themselves for critical consciousness. In the near future, we may hope to have more data to show us the ways boys fare better when they have loving parents, whether together or apart, who teach them how to be intimate. Meanwhile, let us create the space where males who lack relational skills can learn them. As Zhukov and Francis boldly state in The Heart of the Soul, quote, "Intimacy and the pursuit of external power, the ability to manipulate and control, are incompatible," end quote. Before most men can be intimate with others, they have to be intimate with themselves. They have to learn to feel and be aware of their feelings. Men who mask feelings or suppress them simply do not want to feel the pain. Since emotional pain is the feeling that most males have covered up, numbed out, or closed off, the journey back to feeling is frequently through the portal of suffering. Much male rage covers up this place of suffering. This is the well-kept secret. Often, when a female gets close to male pain, penetrating the male mask to see the emotional vulnerability beneath, she becomes a target for the rage. Shame at emotional vulnerability is often what men who are closed down emotionally seek to hide. Since shaming is often used to socialize boys away from their feeling selves toward the patriarchal male mask, many grown men have an internal shaming voice. Studies indicate that patriarchal fathers are rarely killed by their children. Mothers are murdered more. For the rage many males feel from father shaming is usually transferred to female authority figures. With females, especially the wounded boy inside, the man can rage with no fear of reprisal. The more intimate the relationship, the more likely she is to be both the target of his rage and the secret keeper, telling no one that he is addicted to rage. This is especially the case where the acting out male is a son who is physically hitting a mother or weaker siblings. The violence of sons, especially adolescent boys, towards mothers is rarely talked about in our culture. Now that so many adult single men return home to live with female parents or never even leave, there is a growing problem of domestic discord, both emotional and physical, that is covered up. Intimate terrorism in male-female couple relationships is identified as a problem, particularly emotional abuse. Yet very little is said about the intimate terrorism between adult children and parents. The recent film The Piano Teacher graphically showed the sadomasochistic violence that can exist between an adult child and a parent, assuming the form of both emotional and physical abuse. In this film, the adults shown are female, and audiences are allowed to interpret what they see according to traditional sexist notions of female competition. Yet in real life, there is tremendous emotional abuse happening in single mother-adult-son relationships that is not named. Women in patriarchal culture are trained to cover up and hide male abuse, all the more so when the culprit is a son and the victim his mother. These situations of unhealthy intimacy exist because of our cultural failure to teach women and men what intimacy is. And as long as women remain the primary parental caregivers, we will have the lion's share of the responsibility for learning how to be intimate ourselves and sharing that knowledge with both male and female children. Learning how to be intimate is a relational skill that teaches us the value of self-knowledge. Offering a broader, more meaningful definition of intimacy than the old notion of simply being close and vulnerable to somebody, Gary Zhukov and Linda Francis state that you create intimacy when you shift from the pursuit of external power, the ability to manipulate and control, to the pursuit of authentic power, the alignment of your personality with your soul. In recent years, there have been a number of self-help books published that urge readers to care for their souls. Such books by James Hillman, Thomas Moore, and Gary Zukav have been national bestsellers. Ironically, these men speak of the necessity of caring for our souls as though the path to that care is the same for women and men. In the introduction to Thomas Moore's Care of the Soul, he tells readers, fulfilling work, rewarding relationships, personal power, and relief from symptoms are all gifts of the soul. They are particularly elusive in our time because we don't believe in the soul and therefore give it no place in our hierarchy of values. We live in a time of deep division in which mind is separated from body and spirituality is at odds with materialism. But how do we get out of this split? End quote. Visionary thinkers believe that by exposing the way the logic of domination has created the split and choosing the model of interbeing and interdependency, we can begin the work of restoring integrity, and with integrity comes care of the soul. Men caught up in the logic of patriarchal masculinity have difficulty believing that their souls matter. It is perhaps a patriarchal bias that leads Thomas Moore to suggest at the conclusion of his clarion call for all of us to cultivate soulfulness, that care of the soul is not a project of self-improvement. It is not at all concerned with living properly or with emotional health. This need to deny the relationship of care of the soul to self-nurturance is itself indicative of the very binary splits in consciousness that Moore critiques. There is no one who cares for her or his soul rightly who does not experience an enhancement of emotional well-being. Men need to hear that their souls matter and that the care of their souls is the primary task of their being. Were all men seeking to uncover greater soulfulness in their lives rather than seeking power through a dominator model, then the world as we know it would be transformed for the better. It cannot be a mere accident of fate that the visionary male teachers who are offering us messages about the ways to care for the soul that will enhance life on the planet are men of color from poor countries, men who live in exile, men who have been victimized by imperialist male violence. Two men who come to mind are His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. In Ethics for the New Millennium, the Dalai Lama calls for a spiritual revolution. He shares his belief that all humans desire happiness and that a principal characteristic of genuine happiness is inner peace, which he links to developing concern for others. His soulful message echoes that of feminist thinkers who are telling the world that men can heal their spirits by developing relational skills, the ability to experience empathy, to care for others. The existence of visionary male teachers who offer males and females spiritual guidance is a constant reminder to us that the hearts of men are transformed by love and compassion. Consistently, the Dalai Lama teaches us about the need to cultivate the practice of compassion. Whether males ever see themselves as working to end patriarchy, the fact remains that any man who chooses the way of compassion heals the spirit and moves away from domination. The Dalai Lama offers this wisdom. Compassion is one of the principal things that make our lives meaningful. It is the source of all lasting happiness and joy, and it is the foundation of a good heart. Through kindness, through affection, through honesty, through truth and justice toward all others, we ensure our own benefit. This is not a matter for complicated theorizing. It is a matter of common sense. There is no denying that our happiness is inextricably bound up with the happiness of others. There is no denying that if society suffers, we ourselves suffer. Thus, we can reject everything else, religion, ideology, all received wisdom, but we cannot escape the necessity of love and compassion. End quote. This is the care of the soul that males and females must attend to if we are to sustain life on the planet, if we are to live fully and well. Most men in our society believe in higher powers, and yet they have learned to devalue spiritual life, to violate their own sense of the sacred. Hence, the work of spiritual restoration, of seeing the souls of men as sacred, is essential if we are to create a culture in which men can love. When the hearts of men are full of compassion and open to love, then, as the Dalai Lama states, there is no need for temple or church, for mosque or synagogue, no need for complicated philosophy, doctrine, or dogma, for our own heart, our own mind, is the temple, and the doctrine is compassion. When contemporary feminist movement was at its most militant, those of us who worshipped male deities were often made to feel as though we were traitors. Yet many of us found it especially useful in maintaining our love for males and appreciation for the sacredness of the male soul, to separate patriarchal ideology from the powerful images of nurturing and loving kindness embodied in male religious figures. Many of us who are wounded daughters from Christian backgrounds found it useful to meditate daily on the 23rd Psalm, because it evoked for us the image of a father caring for our souls, affirming and assuring us that we would survive, that goodness and mercy would be accorded us, and that the Father would keep us forever in his care. This image of loving fatherhood embodies feminist masculinity in its most divine form. Healing the spirit, caring for the souls of boys and men, we must dare to proclaim our adoration, to bow down not to the male as dominator, but to the male as embodied divine spirit with whom we can unite in love, with no threat of separation, knowing a perfect love that is without fear. This has been The Will to Change, Chapter 9, Healing Male Spirit, written by Bell Hooks, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz. Thanks for reading along.